Hello, humans. I'm Shiva,
And I'm Steve.
and welcome to Steve and Shiva's Great Adventure, where we talk about sticky, challenging topics that keep us up at night. Keep in mind that we're speaking purely from experience and from our personal backgrounds in learning organizational behavior and learning and leadership and development. And we're not advocating that our ideas and perspectives are the best or even right. We're just two people having a conversation. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about equity, which is a concept that is still very new in the country that we both live in, which is Spain. Um, so, Steve, I want to ask you, what is it? What is so fucking hard about equity, and why is it so hard to understand that, in your opinion?
I think for me, the reason it's so hard is because it's really difficult to do. And often people just don't want to do it. So we can often focus on individual issues like, homophobia or sexism or gender issues or whatever, but they all stem from the same source. And that source is equity or disequity or injustice. And that is a much bigger concept because it tends to be structural
Yes.
and it tends to be very macro. And so people often just focus on the micro and think, well, how is this affecting me from both sides? So, like we were talking before, affirmative action in the US has been a really positive force, bringing people who might otherwise be left out into the arena of various scenarios. But the people who've lost out from that, you can understand why they're upset and angry about it. So, equity is a really tough thing because it's tough to do.
Well, how about we define equity to begin with? Because I think, not think, we both know there's a lot of confusion around what's inclusion, what's equity, what's equality. Like, how do we tease this out?
Well, for me, we had a conversation earlier the week. I shared with you the standard kind of image that does the
Yeah.
rounds about what equity is, and it was interesting to see the responses that you dug up, where people then get hung up on the graph, when in actual fact the concept is what we're trying to think about. And for me, it's about trying to organize things in such a way that everyone can come in and participate.
Mm.
That if there's a barrier, we try our very hardest to take the barrier out of the way. And the barriers are individual, not systemic. So, if you need something that's specific to you that will help you advance, then that's how we should respond. That's my
Mm.
take on it.
Okay.
What do you think?
I think, yeah, I was hung up on the part of individual versus systemic because I think it is also systemic, at least in terms of culture, in that the way that we recruit, using a networking system where at the end of the day, you're just bringing in other people who are just like you, which means the pool of people that you're gathering from is already limited, which means that you're automatically excluding a bunch of people. Um, and going back to that image, I think this ties into what you said about individual versus systemic. And we talked about this before as well, where one of the articles I sent you was talking about, well, they shouldn't be on boxes, and they shouldn't, not boxes, but they shouldn't be shorter or taller, right? Because that means that it's an individual deficit in a sense, and it's not their fault. I mean, they're just naturally born that way, but that instead it shouldn't be about their personal height. It should be about the ground itself. So like there's a hole dug in there, and the person standing there versus the one who's standing on a higher ground, and that's a different perception of it. So I see it in that sense of like, okay, it's not just the individual thing, but it's also the system that allowed them the opportunities or didn't. And that also talks into, a lot of people use the term an achievement gap, where it's not, yeah, there might be a gap in achievement, but it's also because there's a gap in opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with all of that. I think it is the interaction of the system with the individual and whether
Yes.
the system can respond or not. So it's not responding when, say, in the United States and the United Kingdom, where we're both from, the majority or a big chunk of people who are in prison are people of color, or the people who are losing jobs more than anyone else during the pandemic are women. And that is an example where equity is not happening. There's something going wrong in the various systems that create these kind of situations. But we just we find it so too big to really
Yes.
challenge, and
Yeah.
so it just continues.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. Yes. I mean, and working in leadership programs, so often there's a program right now that fell on my lap, for example, that is like, I'm trying to think of how I explain this without giving away who it is. but they want to do basically a leadership program for minority groups. And part of me was thinking, yeah, but I don't know, like I completely agree with that. And it's my favorite demographic of people to work with for so many reasons. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I don't know, it kind of feels like you're putting the responsibility to improve things on the people who are not the victims, but who are kind of the recipients of all the shit going on. So one of my first questions to them is, well, what else are you doing? Like, what are you changing in the organization itself? What are you changing in your culture and the conversations that you have and the questions that you ask the people? Like, what are you doing in all of that to change it? And why is it just throwing a leadership program to a minority that isn't achieving as much as you thought that they should be?
Yeah, that's really interesting because an alternative approach would be to work with the majority and say, why are these people not getting the same opportunities? There's something
So,
about our community that's preventing that. What is that? How do we recognize it and how do we stop it?
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I know the argument is always there. Well, how are they going to know if they're not experiencing it? But it's like, well, you need to put some fucking responsibility on the majority as well. And it goes back into what you said of it just seems so big and scary that we don't want to take it on. But at the same time, I'm like, but if you're the majority, you actually have more, weight and pull to be able to make
Yeah.
this happen.
But I think the weight and pull that you just said there leads us neatly on to the issue of power. I
Oh,
have the
yes.
power. I don't want to give it up. As a white educated male, I have way more power than you do. I'll be able to walk into rooms without question. I'll be invited to speak probably before you are in events, etc. And that's ridiculous. I mean, it actually makes no sense whatsoever, but it's likely to happen just because I'm a white middle class educated male. And when you come to my door and say, Steve, I don't want you to speak at this event because we're going to get some women in, or we're going to get some people from minorities in,
Yeah.
then that's my opportunity to say, yeah, I really do believe in equity. But what I might do instead is say, oh, well, wait a minute. Of course, I want women to have all those opportunities, and I want minorities to have those opportunities, but not at my expense.
Yeah.
And that's where the rubber hits the road.
My God. And what you like, yeah, and the power dynamic in that of giving up my power, giving up my whatever privilege. And I just realized, and I feel so fucking stupid for realizing this just now, but so often a lot of the trainings I do are for women and for minority groups, and women are not minority groups, by the way, but I love that we always put that
Yeah.
together. Um, and it's always about taking back your power, right? Speaking into your power, leaning into your power, taking back your power. And I literally just said those words yesterday to a group of people. And now I'm playing right into the game as well. I'm trying to get them to pull themselves up instead of going, well, no, actually the majority, they're stronger. They should be doing the fucking pulling up and helping with that work, with that load. Oh my God.
Yeah. I watched a really interesting TED talk today, a woman who set up a women only software company in the UK in the early 1960s. And all of the people who worked for her were women. They were all working from their homes. They worked in flexible schedules. She wouldn't employ men. I mean, it was basically a women-only endeavor. She gave up 25% of the company shares to her employees. She made them millionaires. So she was doing all of this in the 1960s. But she
Wow.
made a really interesting comment at the end that the reason successful women have flat heads is because of the patronizing pats in the heads that men give them when they do something good. And I think that's true. There is a woman who has achieved incredible things. I'd never heard of her, but I've
Yeah.
heard of plenty of men who've done far less than she has. And because men are talking about what they achieve all the time, it's actually very hard to hear from successful women. We drown them out with lots of other voices, and successful people from other communities, not just women, but women, I think, are served very badly in that arena.
Oh yeah. And then imagine if you're not a white woman, it's even 10 times
Yeah,
worse.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And I realize we've kind of gone off the topic of equity a little bit, but there's something else I want to speak into, which was um, being treated as a woman in like the United States, for example, versus Spain. And I realize that there's always the argument that Spain is a little bit more machista, and they're very self-critical as well about this. But in some ways, I realized I've been treated, I mean, very differently as a woman in business in the US and business here, but I think I've been treated better here. And I'm also realizing now, because of the United States, even though I look very white, I don't identify as white. And with a name like Shiva Rufa and being Iranian and Muslim and Jewish, I'm not white in there in the eyes of most Americans.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, maybe that might be part of it, because in Europe, people see me as a white American. You know, they don't see me as white passing or in any way, shape, or form a person of color, regardless of the fact that I'm from the Middle East.
Yeah.
And I really sense the difference in the level of respect, in the level of, you know, taking my ideas seriously, hearing me. And we've been in situations where we've had really shitty leaders who don't do that, but still, it's been better than the United States.
Yeah, I think here in Europe you don't represent a threat.
Yeah,
And so people will look at you and take you at face value, and so you want opportunities, well, okay, you can have them.
yeah,
If you had come directly from Iran as a refugee here now,
yeah. That'd be very different.
I'm not sure what your reception
No,
would be.
no.
Uh, so coming via the US, gives you a legitimacy here. That if you had come directly as a refugee from Iran, maybe you wouldn't have had. I don't know, but I mean, I think it's a really good point. I think the other issue about Spain that keeps women in a place that they shouldn't be is the ridiculously gendered language. And,
Oh,
and
yes,
why they're
yes.
not doing something about that, I don't know. I
It's
mean,
like, please just change all
I
of
thought
your
when I
fucking words so
no, I
that a
know.
table is not fucking feminine.
I came here and thought everybody had gay grandfathers. It's like, wow, you've got two grandfathers. They're gay. That's amazing. You know, and then you kind of realize that they do it for everything, and like the male word is the preferred word in
Oh, yes,
all
yeah,
cases.
yeah.
And
It's not parents,
that's,
it's fathers.
yeah, fathers, grandfathers, and the children would be in the masculine form.
Yep.
And somebody somewhere needs to challenge that. I mean, if there's anyone from this world of Spanish listening or watching this, please do something about it. But words matter, and if my gender is left out in language, then it's giving me a subtle message that I don't count, that I'm
Yeah,
not there, I'm
yeah,
not
you don't
part of it.
matter.
And that is all part of equity. Everything that you've said is all part of our understanding of equity. It's about fairness, it's about
Mm,
justice, it's about the system responding to you and saying, you can have an opportunity because you deserve it.
yeah. And that, you know, we acknowledge that society has not made it easy for you, and that there have been very specific ways that you've been held back, and we're going to make the effort to level it out for you.
Yeah. And so I think, as you say, corporate trainers who say, come and support our little minority group, maybe the answer there is, well, actually, I'd quite like to work with the majority group who are making life miserable for your
Yeah,
minority group. Let's focus on that.
yeah. God, that is yeah, and then changing the training that you get for minorities, instead of, you know, how do you succeed in this majority world, and still be yourself, to even things like, well, how do you deal with all the fucking microaggressions that you receive every day? How do you
Yeah.
speak back into that? You know,
Yeah.
how can you maintain your sanity and your own
Yeah.
well-being?
Yeah. And I mean, some of the stuff you read about women, success for women in business, I mean, it's appalling, because it's like, well, you'll have to work twice as hard as men, and you'll have to be twice as aggressive as men. You'll
Mm,
have to do that. And it's like, you know, that is completely unhealthy. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. But I mean, in terms of an agenda or a pathway, I mean, that just sounds horrendous.
yeah,
If you're saying to young women nowadays, this is the only way you can succeed, by besting the other gender, then come on, there has to be a better way than that.
it speaks into that, doesn't it? All the programs,
Yeah,
not just the gender
yeah,
ones, but also, like, you know, Black leadership programs, for example, or minority ethnicity leadership programs. It is still saying that, isn't it? That you
yeah,
still have to do better. You still have to put in
yeah,
more work.
yeah,
And I know people are going to come back and say, yeah, but, you know, everyone who's moving up to leadership level will have some sort of leadership training. I'm like, yeah, they will. And I know that you're trying to make the general leadership training that you have be, you know, targeted to the needs of this audience. But at the same time, you have to address the majority that's making it hard for them to begin with. Freaking move
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's like I saw someone I know in the education world is speaking at a conference, and it's on a panel, and the panel consists of just four men. And this is someone I've worked with for quite a long time, and I'm just curious as to why that individual wouldn't be asking questions of the
Yeah.
organizers of that event and saying, is that, I mean, it's not some obscure science that they're discussing, it's marketing.
Yes.
Are there no women who know anything about marketing who could speak about that? And it's like, how do we raise awareness in each other so that we can spot that immediately and say, okay, let's stop before we go to publicity. Let's stop, take a moment, look at what we've done. Gosh, a panel of all men, a manel. Let's stop that and reconfigure.
Mm.
But we're still doing it because that sensitivity is not there.
No, and I also think it's up to us as speakers as well to pull that in. So there's this one person I follow. She's brilliant. She worked in the travel industry for years, and now she's shifted into DEI, and she will copy and paste emails that people have sent her. Trying to pitch her and get her in to be a spokesperson or whatever, taking out the names and whatever. But you can tell, for example, for Black History Month in the United States, companies approaching her, trying to get her in to speak on things. And she shows the emails that she writes back, and it's brilliant. And I stupidly never occurred to me to ask directly, okay, can I get a history of your past speaking, whatever events that you've had, and the demographic in terms of the speakers, and not only who are the speakers who are going to be with me on this panel, but what's your history been of this? I fucking never thought to ask that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I worked with a company a while ago where one of the owners, if they saw in the publicity photographs that were generated for marketing, if they saw uh, black faces, he would ask them to be removed so that the company presented a nice shiny white
Sorry,
picture
can you
to them.
can you tell me who was this? Can you tell me a little bit about what?
No, that's basically the story, and I think it's those kind of things are
Oh
what's
yeah.
happening,
Well,
and I feel, it doesn't surprise me at all. It depresses me,
yes, yeah,
and I think that's why it's really easy to dive into one of the kind of specific issues, like sexism or gender issues or whatever. But above that is the issue of inequity. The system is
yeah,
fucked. And the only way we can unfuck it is by becoming aware, becoming human beings with a conscience,
yeah,
and starting to ask these kind of questions that you and I are asking each other. And it's not that we have the answers,
yeah,
because we don't. But I think a good start is to have some good questions at
yes,
least.
yes. And in that sense, I completely agree with you in that the change depends on the individual. Then and of course we wanted to get to the policy level, but that change starts with the individual and speaking into that horrible human being. Yeah, there should be someone there to say, hold on, but why?
Yeah.
If you made this decision, I'd like you to explain the reason behind it, and can you own up to that?
Yeah. And I think that what you said about the organization and organization's history,
Yeah,
how can we empower people of color or women or whoever might be seen to be, doing less well in a company? How can we empower them to ask good questions of the majority, in terms of how they're seen and the opportunities they're given,
yeah,
as opposed to them having, as you said earlier, to work even harder
yeah,
to get what they already deserve.
yeah.
So in terms of how can people be confident enough to challenge behavior
And that's tough.
without it ruining their careers?
Oof,
Because
exact. That's
the
exactly.
chances are,
Yeah,
if you call something out, if you
yeah,
call out bad behavior at work, it could be really risky.
yeah. And that's exactly what I was saying. What the idea of empowering the marginalized group to speak up, there is that fear so much of, well, what if I say something, they're going to fire me? And I understand also, do I really want to work in this organization? No, but maybe I need to.
Yep, Absolutely. And so these conversations, as we said before we started recording, it's really easy to have this conversation in this little vacuum, but
Yeah,
you know, in real life, people are making decisions all the time just to keep
without being
themselves
challenged. Yep.
safe, and they don't want to either be challenged or challenged, depending on where they are in that spectrum, and for good reasons. I totally get it. You know, I understand why people are angry in the US when affirmative action has meant they didn't get an opportunity they were well qualified for. That must really suck. That must feel awful. But in societies that are about we and us, you know, we the people, there should be some higher notion that it's not just about me. I mean, you might
Hmm.
think that, but it isn't just about you. Unfortunately, sorry, kids, it is actually about all of us. And if we can help all sectors of our community thrive, we're all going to do better. But we've kind of lost that notion, I
Oh
think.
God, yes. Yes,
So
very
we
much.
have interest groups instead. So each one of the areas where there's some deficit will gather around that their own issue and will fight for their own issue. When in
Yeah,
actual fact, where we
yeah.
need to gather and coalesce is around that bigger issue of who has the power, how do we share it, how do we challenge the structures so that everybody has a chance.
And to what extent am I willing to give up some of my own power?
Yeah, and that's it. That's the bit where we're saying this is about us together. So,
Yes.
you know, as a white, educated, middle-aged, middle class guy, am I willing to actually say, okay, Shiva, you can do this one. I don't need to be on that panel. I don't need to do that bit of work.
Yeah.
I think it would be better if you did it, representing your story, which is much richer, more richer than mine in that context. So I'll take a step back, and that's the challenge.
Am I willing to share the opportunities? Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
All right. Well, I think on that note, this has been, for me, the best episode that we've taped, considering it's the first one that we've taped. I don't think we
Okay.
fucked it up too much. I think we were pretty honest with ourselves and about what we believe. And yeah, I also realized in the course of the conversation about how many twists and turns it takes, about how difficult it really is to talk about equity. And sometimes just asking the questions is the first step. So thank you for watching Steve and Shiva's Great Adventure. And if
Thank
you
you.
enjoyed this, yeah, please like and share and comment. Tell us how much you love us, how much you hate us, if you agree or disagree, whatever comes up at you. And that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.